Hi guys, welcome back. In today's video I'll be showing you how I made this beautiful Basque waistline dress with shoulder drawstrings, and it also has an overlap at the front. If this looks like what you are interested in learning, then please keep watching and let's get started. This is the fabric I'll be using for this tutorial, and I have 3 yards of crepe fabric here. We are going to be drafting on a pattern paper, and I have my paper here, and I've gone ahead to rule a straight line on my paper to serve as the shoulder line. I'm going to be placing my tape on the line, and I'm going to mark the bust measurement I am working with, which is 10 inches. The under bust measurement I'm working with is 14 inches, but I came up by half of an inch and I marked 13.5 inches. And then I'm going to mark 16 inches for the waistline, and then I'll come down from the waistline by 4 inches to get the length of my basque. Then I'll rule straight lines across, and I am going to label my lines. We have the bust point, the under bust, the waistline, and then the full length, that is the point where the basque is going to stop. Next, I will mark half of the shoulder measurement I am working with on the shoulder line, and then I'm also going to mark 2.5 inches for the neck width. And the shoulder measurement I am working with is 15 inches, half of it is 7.5. That was what I marked there. And then I placed my tape on that shoulder point, and then I marked 11 inches for the length of the sleeve, and then I came down by 1 inch from the 11 inches point. So that is to create the slope for the shoulder, and then I connected it into a neck line. On the under bust line, I marked the under bust measurement I am working with divided by 4, which is 7 inches. On the waistline as well, waist measurements divided by 4, and then on the full length I just went ahead to mark the hip measurement I am working with divided by 4, and then I'll use my rule now to connect my points. At this point I skipped a step and I marked what I was not supposed to mark on the under bust line, but we are going to come to that. The next thing we are going to do is to come to the sleeve here, and I am going to mark 8.5 inches downwards from the slope of the shoulder, and then I am going to connect that with a straight line into the shoulder slope. And then after that I am going to be extending my underbust line, so I extend it all the way, and then I am going to be coming inwards from the underbust line by 4 inches. So that was what I did earlier, which I was not supposed to do until I extended the underbust line and created the opening for the sleeve. And I am going to connect from the sleeve opening into the 4 inches I came in by on the underbust line. Next, I'm going to be marking the neckline for the front, and I'm going to be connecting from the neck width into the underbust line, and then we are going to be marking for the back as well, because we'll be using this to cut the back. And I marked from the neck width to the bust point, that is where the back neckline is going to stop, and then I'll go ahead to cut out. And if you watch carefully, I cut only the back neckline first. We are going to be cutting on our fabric before we go ahead to cut out the front neckline. So this is how it looks after cutting. I'll be coming down from the waistline here by 1.5 inches to create the basque. You can maintain the waist measurement if you want. You don't have to come down, or you can come down if you want, but I later decided to alter mine. You'll be seeing that in the course of the video. So this is how it looks. The next thing I am going to do now is to cut on the fabric. Before you cut your pattern pieces, make sure to cut the lower part first. So I went ahead to just cut the lower part. This is the part that we are going to be gathering, and it is 3 yards in length. For the length of the dress, I just placed my tape and then I took out the points, that's the waist point of what I have on my pattern paper, and then I was able to get the length of the dress, and then I added allowance for hemming the lower part and then joining the waist line. So because this dress has a funny way of going up on the sides, I decided to use the sides to determine the length of the dress. Meanwhile, the front and the back are going to be a little bit lower because of the basque waistline. I hope you guys understand. So I went ahead to fold my fabric into two, and then I am going to be trimming 1 inch from the center of the top part. This is so that the basque is going to relax well on this part. I went ahead to notch it so that I'll know the midpoint, and then I will set that aside. This is the back. I've gone ahead to cut it on fabric. I added ½ inch on the neckline, 1 inch for zipper allowance here, and then 1 inch on the shoulder for the drawstrings, and then ½ inch on the lower part here, ½ inch on the side, and then ½ inch on the sleeve opening. And I have two pieces here, and then on this other part of the back, I added ½ inch on the top, ½ inch on the lower part, 1 inch for zipper allowance, and then 1 inch for sewing allowance. So on this zipper allowance, I'm going to be trimming out ½ inch on the waistline point to eliminate zip bulge. So just watch carefully to see how I will be doing this. So the same way I am trimming this is the same way I'll be attaching my zipper when I'm attaching my zipper. I will follow the curve when attaching my zipper so it doesn't bulge. I have two pieces here as well, and then this is the front. I'll go ahead to trim the neckline of the front, so we're going to be using this now to cut the front. And after cutting on fabric, this is how it looks. I extended the lower part of the front here by 2 inches for the overlap, and then on the neckline part here I added just ½ inch, and then I connected it from the 2 inches to the ½ inch. And then on the shoulder part of the front I added 1 inch, the same way we did for the back. This is for the drawstring. On the lower part of the front I added ½ inch joining allowance. On the sleeve opening I added ½ inch, and on the side as well I added ½ inch, and I have two pieces here as well. So for this part of the front I added ½ inch on the top, ½ inch on the lower part, and 1 inch on the side for sewing allowance. And this is how it looks. I cut this on fold, that is why it's looking this way. And then that is it for the cutting. So for the sewing here I cut facing. Okay, for this front part I cut facing, and I have two pieces for the waist part of the front. One is going to serve as main piece and one as lining. And then this is the back here. I also went ahead to cut facing for this back. For the lower part of the back I cut 4 pieces, 2 for each side, one for main piece, one for lining. And then this is for the drawstrings. Here I have 27 inches length and 1.5 inches width. And then here I am going to be joining my facing to the front piece. So just go ahead to join it from the top all the way down. For my facing I just went ahead to cut a straight long piece of fabric measuring about 3 inches thereabout. So you can just go ahead to use your piece to cut the facing, so you can cut exactly what you have on your front. So because my facing is longer, I'll just go ahead to trim it off. Okay, and I went ahead to hem the edge of this facing. I just went ahead to fold it in one time and sew it. If you have an overlocking machine, what we normally call a weaving machine, you can go ahead to finish that part neatly. And then I'll just go ahead now to trim off the excess on mine. I repeated the same step on the second part of the front as well. For the back, this is the facing I cut. I'll go ahead to join it on the neckline and stop here. Okay, that's because I always like my zip to enter in between the facing and the main piece. So I'll just go ahead to curve my facing, just give it this curvy shape here, and then I'll go ahead now to sew it. So guys, after sewing the facing on the back, this is how it looks. And I also finished the edge of the facing neatly by folding it in and sewing it. And this is how it looks. And this is how the other part of the back looks as well. And then this is the front, like I said, and this is the other part of the front. So we're going to be placing it this way to overlap each other. and I am going to be making it to overlap by about 3.5 inches. Remember that I had left like about 2 inches for the overlap, but if I do the 2 inches, it's going to have a very deep neckline, which I don't want. So I made it to overlap by about 3.5 inches here. Okay, so I'll just go ahead to measure my 3.5 inches, and this is it. I'll go ahead now to sew it down, okay, to hold it down, and then I'm going to run a loose stitch and then gather this. So I just gather this to the waistline that I'm working with, okay, that's the waistline on the lower part, so that it matches this way. And then after that, I'll go ahead now to join the shoulder of the front and the back by the 1 inch allowance that we left, and I'll also repeat the same on the other side as well. But before we join the shoulder, I'll go ahead to hem the sleeve opening, okay, by 1/2 inch inwards twice, and then repeat on all the openings. And then after that, I've also gone ahead to join the shoulder like I said, and this is how it looks. I'll now go ahead to press open the seam and then also press inwards to create my casing before I sew it down. So for this casing, this drawstring here, I'll go ahead to fold in again, and then sew on top of it, but make sure that one edge is neatly finished this way, okay, then sew. So repeat the same for all the 4 drawstrings, and this is how it looks after pressing neatly. Pressing will help you get a very neat finish, okay, so make sure you press. If you press this, it will be very easy for you to sew on it. So after pressing, this is how it looks. Like I said, I'll now use my drawstrings to pass it through that part after sewing the shoulder. So this is my drawstring here. I'll pass my safety pin into it, and then I'll be passing it through this shoulder here where I had created the channel, okay. So I'll just pass this all the way till it gets to the other side of the shoulder. Make sure that the knit side of your drawstring is on the sleeve opening side, okay, and then this rough part is going to be on the neckline side. So I'm just going to push it inwards a bit, and then I'll sew on it, okay, to hold it down, and then I'll repeat the same for all 4, and this is how it looks. As you can see, it's already turning out beautiful. And then after this, the next thing we're going to do now is to join the lower part of the front, and what I'm going to be doing is to add stay to my piece. I added stay to this piece, okay, just the front piece. You can go ahead to add stay to both your front and back pieces if you want. I added mine just on the front piece. I'll go ahead to mark the midpoint of this front here, and then I'll also mark the midpoint of the top part of the front as well. I'll just go ahead to match each other, match them together, and then sew on it. After sewing it, I'll bring it and show you guys how it looks. This is how it looks after sewing. As you can see, the next thing I'm going to do now is to take the lining piece of the front and then place it this way, and then I'm also going to sew it, and then I'll top stitch on it. And this is how it looks after doing that. I went ahead to also sew on the sides of the waist part of the front to just hold them down, okay, so it's not flying. And then this is the back here. I'll go ahead to run a loose stitch and gather on both sides of the back, and then I will be attaching the back piece, that's the waist part of the back, to it. So I'll just place it this way here and then sew all the way. I'll repeat the same on the other side of the back as well. This is how it looks after doing that. I'll go ahead now to take the lining piece, place it, and also sew on it the same way we did for the front, and then top stitch on the lining piece, okay. Just sew it this way and then top stitch on it, and then this is how it looks. I'll go ahead to sew this down as well on the sides to just hold it down, okay, on both sides. And then after that, this is how it looks. The next thing we are going to do now is to shape our piece. I'll just go ahead to sew all the way from the top down by about 1/2 inch from the top. When I come down to the waistline, I'll make it 1 inch, and then this is how it looks. So after doing this, The next thing I'm going to do now is to gather this piece, that's the lower part that we had cut initially. So guys, for this I'll be going up by 1 inch on the waistline. That's because I did not like the way the Basque waistline is. It's not as sharp as I want it to be, so I went up on the waistline by 1 inch, and I am going to be trimming this off. So if you want, you can do this on your pattern paper, okay, so you don't have to come down on the waistline. You can just, that's why I said that you can just maintain the waistline measurements that you are working with instead of coming down on the waistline. So this is what I'm going to be doing now. I'll just go ahead to trim this off to give me what I want, and then after trimming it, I liked the outcome, so I'll just go ahead now to place the gathered piece of the lower part that I have. Just measure what you have here and make sure that you are gathering to the measurement that is on this waist, because the lower part has to fit here after gathering. So I'll just go ahead now to sew it on this all the way until I get to the other end, and then I'll come show you guys how it looks. So guys, this is how it looks after attaching it, as you can see here. The next thing we are going to do is to close up the back and attach the zipper. So I'll just start closing it up from where I want the zipper to start, but make sure that it matches, okay. And then I'll just sew all the way down, and then I'll attach my zipper. I will also finish all the raw edges in this dress with an overlocking stitch, what we usually call weaving here, and then I will also go ahead to hem this lower part here, hem it this way, and then sew all the way. And this is the final look of our dress, as you can see. Thank you for stopping by. See you in my next one.